Hello, U.S. history students. So this week we are beginning a new unit on Reconstruction, and it's a relatively short unit. Reconstruction, and we're going to talk about this week, is the rebuilding after the Civil War. So since that's where we're headed, what I wanted to do in this lesson is just review what went on at the end of the war, okay? And that's going to set the stage for Reconstruction. Now, you don't have to take any notes on this. There's not going to be a quiz on this presentation. I just want to review what we talked about because this is going to set the stage for what we talk about the rest of this week and next week as well. Okay. Now, the legacy of the Civil War starts with this guy right here. All right. Lincoln. And here's some pictures of Lincoln. This is early on. Of course, this is the familiar one. This used to be the picture that was on the $5 bill. This is one of the last photographs of Lincoln taken before his assassination. All right. And if you compared photographs of Lincoln throughout the war, you would notice he was getting more gaunt, more thin. The war was very, very cumbersome to him. It was wearing on him. And you can kind of see that in his face. It makes him older as he goes through his presidency. Okay. Now, remember, Lincoln thought secession was illegal and that the South had never really left the Union. That was his interpretation of things, okay? We've used that family illustration. They're upset, they've gone off, but they're still part of the family, and someday they're going to come back. Well, by 1864, 1865, it is becoming apparent that the Union is going to win the Civil War and that the South is going to be coming back pretty soon. So in Lincoln's mind, I want to quickly restore the Union. It is one nation. He has said that since the beginning. In fact, that's his whole goal in fighting the war, is to preserve the Union. And then later it's preserve the Union in slavery. But we are one nation, not a collection of sovereign nations, not a collection of sovereign states. So I want to bring these states back and move forward together. Okay. Now, that's not to say there's not going to be changes. For example, slavery is going to end, but I want to bring the country back together and then we could move forward together. And it's also not to say there's not going to be other problems, but we're going to work through them together as one because we are one nation. I am not going to punish the South. That's just going to lead to division. I know what they've done is treason. I know some of you are seeing them as traitors, but if we punish them, that's going to add to the division and that's going to end to more problems down the road. And that is not what we want to do. Okay. And this is best summarized by his second inaugural address, where he says, and there's this picture, and I'm going to come back to it here in just a second. At his second inaugural address, he says, with malice towards none, with charity for all, to bind up the nation's wounds. Okay, so his goal is to bring this country back together, and then we can face the oncoming problems together as one. Okay, now I showed you this picture in class. For those of you that were in class, this is a better picture. It's also a reverse image. Here is Lincoln, okay, giving his speech right there. All right. Down here, these guys, those are co-conspirators with John Wilkes Booth. That's Davy Harold and Lewis Powell or Lewis Payne. He has a couple aliases. And if we could look up here in front of this statue here in front of the Capitol, John Wilkes Booth is up here looking at Lincoln down here on the stage. Okay, so John Wilkes Booth is up here in this crowd. All right, and remember, at this point in time, Booth and his co-conspirators are seriously thinking about kidnapping Lincoln, but all that's going to change. Okay, because as part of Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction, not only are we going to free the slaves, but he also begins to throw out feelers about giving African Americans full rights as citizens, including the right to vote. And that's going to make John Wilkes Booth and his co-conspirators change their plans. All right. Which is going to lead us to the next big event, Lincoln's assassination. All right. Because this is what Lincoln wanted to do, but Lincoln's assassination is going to change all that. And of course, here's John Wilkes Booth, the assassin. Now, Lincoln is killed by John Wilkes Booth. He is shot on April the 14th, 1865, while he's attending a play at Ford's Theater, but he dies the next day, April the 15th, 1865. And it is 6 days after the Confederate surrender. He's shot 5 days after the surrender. The surrender was on April the 9th. He is shot on April the 14th. Then he will die 6 days later on April the 15th. And of course, he was shot at Ford's Theater, Washington, D.C., while he's watching that play, Our American Cousins. I'm a firm believer. I will say this a lot in class based on other books that I've read. I think Reconstruction and what comes after Reconstruction would have been drastically different had Lincoln lived. I think he had the strength to guide the country through the next several years. I think he had the strength to get people to work together. I think he would have been willing to listen to all sides and then worked out a compromise, and we could have moved forward together. But with him gone, that's going to change Reconstruction. That's where we're going to head this week. Now, other things that are going on. The North, okay. Oh, and this is a picture of the hanging of his conspirators, okay. This is Lewis Payne. He was very, very tall. You have Davy Harold and George Azarat. Over here, there are these two. And then a woman was involved. Her name is Mary Surratt. And this is her right there being hung. John Wilkes Booth is going to be shot in the back in a tobacco barn as he's trying to escape into Virginia. They will drag him out of the barn and he will die on the porch of the farmhouse nearby. But that's what happens to Booth. Now, besides all this, okay, sectionally, effect of the war on the North is doing great, okay? The economy is booming. It's an industrial economy. In fact, it is strong. It is becoming a global economy. This is going to lead us into industrialization. While Reconstruction is going on, the North is leading us into industrialization, and the fact that we are industrializing is going to make the United States become a world power, all right? We're going to begin to get involved in international affairs, and the biggest of which coming up are World War I and World War II. But even before that, with imperialism, we're going to talk about imperialism a little bit in this class as well. But the United States is beginning to be seen as a world power, and it is in part due to the strong industrial economy of the North and the industrialization that's coming out of that part of the country as well. Now, the South, totally different story, okay? It is embittered and devastated. And it is embittered and devastated because farms have been destroyed, railroads have been destroyed, factories have been destroyed, cities, okay, this is Richmond. Cities like Richmond and Atlanta have been burned to the ground, all right? So this is creating an embittered attitude in the South. And this is why I say I really think the presence of Lincoln was sorely needed, because I think Lincoln would have helped rebuild. All right. And I think he would have sent maybe some aid down into the South to help them rebuild. What we're going to talk about happening is the South is going to be put in the military occupation, and some of those guys that are in charge of the southern states under military occupation are corrupt. And that's going to increase this feeling of bitterness, and that's going to increase the devastation. The South also has no labor force. Okay, keep in mind the 13th Amendment has ended slavery. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. But there is no more slave labor. And a bunch of the farmers themselves, your small farmers and the people that worked in the factories, those guys are dead. Okay, those Confederates have been killed. And if they're not dead, some of them are coming back with pretty serious wounds. All right. So it is very, very difficult on the South. All right. And it's very, very good for the North. And in some cases, the North is going to take advantage of the South. And that's going to continue to add to this bitterness and this devastation. And that's not going to bode well for Reconstruction and what comes after. All right. Now, in terms of total cost of the war, before we get to that, remember, the South is going to remain poor for decades. In fact, there are some people that are going to argue it is still poor today, that we are still dealing with the effects of the Civil War and Reconstruction today on the South. And I think that's a pretty fair assumption and a pretty fair statement as well. Now, in terms of total cost of the war, okay, we talked about this. 600,000 are killed, 500,000 are wounded. All right, thereabouts. Notice on this diagram, okay, this kind of shows you the South was destined to lose. The fact that the South held on as long as it did is pretty spectacular. But the Union had around 2,200,000 soldiers. The Confederates only had 800,000. All right. So the Union, in terms of numbers and things, greatly outweighed the South. Of those, as we said, a total cost of 600,000 dead and 500,000 wounded. And you can see here the results. I mean, this gentleman right here, and I forget if he's from the North or the South, but coming home, he's going to have difficulty working. He's got no legs. All right. And you can see this pile of feet and legs, amputations. All right. This picture up here shows a new process called embalming. All right. We're going to try to preserve the dead and send them home to their families and friends for funerals. But this is the total cost of the war: 600,000 dead, 500,000 wounded. All right. And that is the situation that we find ourselves in as we move here from the end of the Civil War into Reconstruction. And that is what is going to play a role in the politics of Reconstruction, which is what we're going to begin to discuss in our next lesson.